Passing of former President F.W. de Klerk, also sending his condolences to the de Klerk family. We did get that news a little bit earlier on, even though in the background we have that business of the day, the medium-term budget policy statement. To go into more analysis of what we've heard about a few minutes ago, we are joined by Issa Mhlanga, who's the chief economist at Alexander Forbes. Issa, thank you so much for your time. Your initial reaction in terms of what the minister delivered.
I think this is a good budget if you consider that it's restructuring spending away from current spending towards investment. What we've seen in the 3 years before the pandemic, government spending was growing positively. Now what is projected is that government consumption is going to be contracting for 3 consecutive years. On the investment side, what we observe is following many years of contraction in investment, the next 3 years are going to see positive growth in investment. That is where the growth story that is going to underpin much of the medium-term expenditure framework is going to come from. But also, if you look in terms of debt, it now peaks, so there is a consolidation that continues. So essentially, the difference between Finance Minister Godongwana and former Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is the type of shoes they're wearing, because they are now continuing with the fiscal consolidation that is set in February.
Issa, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. That is Issa Mhlanga, who's a chief economist at Alexander Forbes. Bulelani, over to you.
All right, thanks, Nastasia. Once again, now joining me is SARS Commissioner Edward Kiswita to talk to us around the issues of revenue. Mr. Kiswita, thank you so much for joining us. An announcement that revision collection is revised upwards to about 120 billion rand. How did we get there?
Well, I think, as the Minister announced, some of that is as a result of better than expected performance, particularly in the mining sector that was boosted by the commodity prices, but also about a 10% increase in production. And then, of course, there is the consistent efforts by SARS. You would know that we are rebuilding SARS, improving our capacity, and encouragingly that's beginning to show some fruits. And so we are confident that the revenue that the Minister announced today, we will certainly be committed to achieving it. There are some downside risks that's out of our control. Firstly, if the economic assumptions don't materialize. Secondly, if we experience further load losses, further load losses, which just puts a brake on the economy and in fact destroys some economic capacity. And then lastly, we still don't know what the fourth wave will do. So those are some of the downside risks, but the SARS team, they will be committed to ensure that what the Minister announced today will be achieved.
Talking about building capacity within SARS, given the past of state capture, how confident are you that maybe we are out of the woods by now, or is it still an ongoing process?
Sadly, we are not out of the woods. You know, when capacity is destroyed, when trust is eroded, it takes years to restore that. And so we are hard at work to rebuild the capacity. That means, first of all, we have to change the mindset and the culture within SARS. The ethos, the integrity with which we behave and engage with taxpayers. Secondly, we have to make sure that the technical skills we've lost, that we bring them back, and that is underway. Thirdly, we must develop future skills such as data scientists to enhance our artificial intelligence work. And then, very importantly, to accelerate our modernization of our systems and technology. SARS is a technology and data-driven organization. And unless we modernize those systems, both within our tax and customs environment, we will not be able to give the kind of response that is necessary in a highly complex world.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Edward Kiswita. As SARS Commissioner, quite a bit about revenue collection as well as developing the capacity within SARS. We now cross back again to Nastasia.
Thank you so much, Bulelani. Well, with me, I've got Lindiwe Zulu, who's the Minister of Social Development. Minister, thank you so much for your time. In the build-up to the speech that we heard earlier, we've spoken to members representing civil society, representing NGOs, as well as Labour. From a social aspect, did this budget policy statement tick off the box for you?
Yes, it did tick off the box. Firstly, from a point of view of that when it comes to issues of social development and what government has done, in particular during the period of COVID-19, and the lessons that have been learned, as well as how government packaged the support to our people. This is a midterm budget, and I'm sure that you did hear the minister speaking about the fact that all the other issues which are of major interest, obviously, to people who are in my space, which is the 350, he did indicate that government had taken a decision to extend it until March next year, number one. Number two, we shouldn't look at that support in an isolated manner. We should look at that support broadly, and therefore the issues of growing the economy, the issues of transformation are all very important to us too as a Department of Social Development, because ultimately we'd like to have a social security package that really assists our people to grow, even for themselves, something that can support them. With regard to the extension, there is no need for us to be talking about the extension at the moment right now, because the minister did indicate that the conversations are still continuing. Let's wait until February. The 350 ends in March in any case. So right now we are in deep conversations about the future.
Thank you so much, Minister. Well, the man of the moment is with us right now. That, of course, is Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, to give us his perspective and build on some of the stuff that we've heard a little bit earlier on. Minister, thank you so much for your time. Your initial, message in the beginning of the speech.
Should I take it off?
You can keep your mask on, sir, for the purposes of being responsible South African citizens.
Okay. No, I'm asking you.
So let's talk about this balancing act everyone was talking about, balancing economic growth with social recovery. How hard was it for you to be able to do that with this particular speech?
Look, it's hard in an environment when the economy is not growing. One of the things where we show people is that when they compare us with other countries, we're saying the rate at which we're borrowing the interest rate is higher than the growth of the economy. What that means is that it's not going to be easy to compare us with other countries. So we're doing tough decisions of saying, you've got to make this choice because the economy is not in a position to recover, and how do you deal with these people? Because there's no prospect of employment in the next year. You see what I mean? So you've got to think about what do we do to cushion the impact.
One of the aspects, of course, we are in a pandemic, we are dealing with that, but the other issue, I suppose, call it the elephant in the room, is the energy supply issues that are an impediment to our economic growth as well as businesses. How do we work around that in getting Eskom to be where we need it to be from an energy point of view?
Let me just say, you said in my statement, I said I'm no longer talking Eskom, because Eskom, we've tried to do this thing for 13 years. And we've pumped money into them for 13 years, as they were in 2008 today. So what we need to do, even if they were to attempt to put new capacity, they're going to replace the decommissioned station. So what we need is a creative environment where more players come in and put electricity to the grid.
I can see you're pressed for time. Speaking on that creative environment, the reforms that the rating agencies would be looking out for, is it enough to stimulate growth in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Look, if I had my way, growing the economy was like taking a matches and box and light it, it grows. I would do it. But the growing an economy is a complex matter. There are many pieces you've got to move in order to make sure that it grows. So what we're trying to do more on a scale basis is to try and move those pieces.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. That is Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana giving us his perspective in terms of those pieces that he talks about, that it is a complex situation in terms of growing the economy. Many pieces have to come together. One of the issues that our economist spoken extensively about, of course, has been energy supply, has been making sure that we balance that expenditure with social recovery, given the context that we are in right now. So over to you, Bulelani.
Thank you once again, Anastasia. Of course, we're trying to get as many reactions as we can on the medium-term budget policy statement. Joining me now is Minister in the Presidency, Mr. Mondli Gungubele. Mr. Gungubele, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, you lead a very important department that deals with issues of monitoring government performance. I want to know now, the department has been established for a couple of years. Do you have systems in place to do that monitoring?
Yes, we have. There's always a big room for improvement, and we are hard at work now to make sure that that department is an infrastructure that helps the president to make credible undertakings, to make credible pronouncement, to take the country along on credible information. Thus, in essence, is our job to make sure that we follow the entire state and the entire country. That machinery is in place. Of course, there's always a room for improvement, which we are doing now.
There's been a lot of emphasis on infrastructure spend. Previously, there's been a whole lot of row around the issue of money that was meant to be allocated for infrastructure, but there was no fruits or meaningful outputs coming from that money. This time around, how are you going to ensure that those monies that have been allocated in the medium term actually go to the intended projects?
The Cabinet Lekgotla met this year to make about 7 priorities. One of those priorities is infrastructure, because for productive capacity to be sustained, you need industrial networks to be in place. That is your transportation, your water, your energy, your information flow. All those things, if they are not in place, every growth is just a storm of the moment. So we are happy that that is in their priorities. But however, I will be crisscrossing the country to report already significant amount of work on infrastructure under the Infrastructure South Africa as led by Dr. Ramkhopa. A lot of work we're not speaking about, and we're trying to correct that. Going forward, the way we monitor this one is going to actually assist us on a platform to continue to monitor that which is going to be spent. But I want to say this. What is key about today is that budget policy, medium-term policy statement is about articulating the intention of government. The minister was very clear that we have to be on a recovery path. At the same time, we can't leave behind those who are desperate, who don't have food on their table. This is how, in my view, this budget was balanced. And again, what it dealt with today, because critical is to create an environment where economies start to flourish. 3 areas are important: security cluster, and the governance, regulatory costs, and the structural reforms. All those are key to the environment that will turn around the economy. That's how balanced, and that statement has been properly made in my view.
I'm going to leave it there. Mr. Mondli Gungubele, I wish I could have asked you more time on load shedding, but we'll have an opportunity next time. Mondli Gungubele, he is the Minister in the Presidency. For more reaction, Anastasia is standing by.
Thank you so much, Belelane. Well, with me, I've got Sinawa Tambo, who is the head of presidency with the Economic Freedom Fighters. Sinawa, thank you so much for your time. The minister mentioned just before you and I are having our conversation right now that an economy is quite complex. A lot of parts need to come together. Given that context and the way we come into this medium-term budget policy statement, what do you make of what was delivered today?
Look, the midterm budget speech delivered by Enoch Godongwana today is just a further confirmation that he is cut from the same austerity cloth as his predecessors, such as Tito Mboweni, and that even when he was internally leading economic transformation in the ANC, he could never come up with a sophisticated policy to create employment and to grow our economy. So their over-reliance on direct foreign investment, they have an over-reliance on private investment and privatization, because they have a naive assumption that the private sector is less corrupt than the public sector, which is not based on any objective reality. So we are not surprised by the midterm budget that has been delivered today, because we expected that they have a policy posture of over-reliance on investment where there's been no verifiable evidence that the private sector has the interests of this economy at heart. Rather, it is more committed to making profit than anything else.
What does the right policy then look like that would have ticked at least 1 or 2 boxes for you right now, and perhaps even better in February next year?
any economic policy, right, that seeks to put South Africa as a global competitor economically must surround itself and base itself on industrialization. So if you want to create jobs, you must revive internal industry and remove the continent and specifically South Africa from the dependent character it has on investment by the private sector. So if a policy doesn't have that at its core, then you have a Minister of Finance who says that there are state-owned entities that are not strategic. You have a Minister of Finance that says that you must practice tough love on institutions that are supposed to sustain the economic sovereignty of the country. So all of these terms, restructuring these SOEs, are just code words for privatization instead of building self-capacity to grow our economy. So any economic policy must anchor itself on industrialization, must pivot itself from SOEs. If we look at China, if you look at the global East, that is what has pivoted these nations to become superpowers economically in the nation. So their character of the ANC and the policy posture of the Minister of Finance is no different from his predecessor. It's no different from the so-called economic recovery plan that was drafted by Investec and Stephen Keshoff and the likes previously. So we were not shocked by this, and nothing is going to come in February as well that is going to be of any substantial meaning or change in terms of economic policy.
Sinawa, thank you so much for your time. That is Sinawa Tambo, is the head of presidency at the Economic Freedom Fighters, giving us his perspective, or rather his take, on what the minister delivered earlier today. Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Anastasia. We're taking more reaction here on the floor. Joining me now is ANC spokesman, Mr. Pule Mabe. Mr. Mabe, the trajectory has been put down by the finance minister. Is it pro-poor and will lead to job creation and growth?
Yes, of course, it is a pro-poor budget. 60% of the expenditure is being directed towards basic services. And this is consistent with the commitments and promises we've made, even in our own local government manifesto. People are aware of the challenges that we were facing. The economy was not doing well, in part because of the pandemic. But we have been able to steer the ship. A number of measures have been undertaken. There's been the presidential stimulus packages intended to create the much needed jobs, give relief through your social relief grants of 350. Those have at least given families a sense of stability under heightened conditions of the pandemic. There's been TERS, the temporary employment relief schemes, to be able to assist those companies that could not be able to perform under conditions of COVID.
But there is still this concern of load shedding where there is still no finality. When is it going to come to an end, particularly from the investment sector?
Well, there are a number of things that are being undertaken, including transitioning to a low carbon economy. There's been a pronouncement about some investments that are going to be made coming out of the United Nations to assist South Africa to be able to transition. This morning, I heard the CEO of Eskom beginning to even talk about electric motor vehicles as part of the things that we've got to begin looking at as part of transitioning to a low carbon economy.
But the money that has been loaned or given to South Africa, does it come with no strings attached?
Well, I wouldn't know. I've not seen the conditions attached to what has been given. What we are hoping is that it will be able to facilitate a just transition that is not going to undermine economic growth, because that is what we are advocating for. That yes, indeed, we need just transition, but that just transition must not undermine economic growth. It must be able to contribute towards stimulating economic growth while dealing with environmental issues.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Pule Mabe. He is the ANC's national spokesperson. And now I'm going to cross with my colleague, Anastasia Rense, to bring this special broadcast. Probably towards the end, your takeaways here in this budget?
I think I found it to be quite a mixed budget, especially when you speak to the different parties, whether you're looking at it from an economic, from a labor point of view, from aspects where people were looking to hear certain crucial information. What was encouraging is that the energy supply issue is top of mind. Being able to stimulate economic growth in order for us to, make some kind of positive dent on that unemployment number is actually on the cards. We do need to see a little bit more detail going into next year in terms of what the plans actually entail and how they will actually be able to deliver that. Remember, I mentioned a little bit earlier on the minister saying that the economy is quite complex. So a lot of parts need to come together. So it's going to be quite interesting to see in February what those parts will look like.
I'm also intrigued by the figure of the growth forecast for the year. It's put at 5.1%. Given the current circumstances with load shedding as well as the lockdowns, do you think it's a realistic number?
It's quite interesting because, when we look at where we are from a vaccination rollout point of view, a lot of the economic recovery is going to hinge on ramping up that vaccination rollout, which he did talk about a little bit earlier on. But what was quite interesting is where his growth projections are sitting when you look at from an economic growth globally, as well as from a domestic point of view. Some of the aspects that I know other people in parts of society will be looking out for is, of course, what's going to happen post the judicial inquiry into state capture. He touched on that in this speech, saying that there are deficiencies in the system that need to be reined in, especially when we look at public procurement of goods. So at least we're hearing the right noises. I'm just not sure whether it's satisfied everyone, and you actually kind of wonder whether there is a budget that ticks off the boxes for all parties of society.
Quite interesting. Social relief measures, there's a couple of numbers that have come out. I'm quite intrigued or interested in how they will roll out this accessing of retirement funds. It's been something that's been in the pipeline, but of course there's always reactions as to whether it can be carried out in a correct way without some of the money going into the wrong hands.
Yes. So he spoke of a two-pot system. So we'll like to see a little bit more detail on how that will work, whether the two-pot system involves having workers take a portion of their money and yet on the same end putting some back. So perhaps that it might work in that particular fashion. The other interesting was the small business support measures where, broadening the types of financial institutions that will be able to provide funding, such as DFIs and non-banks. But it's actually quite interesting if we could get the perspective from those in the financial sector. Does it, mean everything and anything increasing funding for, small businesses? Are there other aspects in which we can able to help small businesses without necessarily going this route? So that needs a little bit more unpacking, perhaps from the minister next year, in terms of the true role these institutions will play, and also case studies. It would be nice to see some case studies that have worked in other countries as well.
On the other hand, just before we go off air, infrastructure development, it's been put at over 500 billion, but there is still a shortfall in terms of the money that's needed. We're still going to have a difficulty in terms of rolling out these infrastructure projects.
Yes, that is quite interesting as well. And those infrastructure projects are going to rely on spending. So again, we come back to that balancing act of being able to support social recovery, but at the same time, watching your spending. And this is where the private sector would need to come in, but they need confidence. They need to know that, one, we've got stable energy supply, that policy is moving in the right direction in order for them to say, well, this is a country we can plug in money for the next 10, 15 or 20 years or so. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity on that.
Well, I'm told we have run out of time, so we're going to bring this live broadcast to a close. My name is Bulelani Philip.
And I'm Nastasia Arendse, and we'll be with you next year, February, right here at the precinct in Parliament to get a little bit more detail for you.